And we'll move to question time. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Yesterday, Queensland Labor Government's acting Premier stated that if the decision to approve or reject Qatar Airways' application for additional international flights had been up to the Queensland Government, they would have been approved. He went on to say that arriving passengers deliver economic activity that creates jobs and prosperity, and that the capacity would create supply, which drives prices down. Yesterday, the South Australian Labor Government also said that more flights and more international airlines drives down prices and encourages more international visitors. And at the end of last week, the federal president of the Labor Party, Wayne Swan, urged the Labor government, the Albanese government, to reconsider the Qatar Airways decision, saying that an appropriate review where things are, given all these revelations, would be good. Will the Prime Minister listen to the criticisms from the Queensland and South Australian Labor government and follow the calls of Mr Swan by committing to undertake a review of his government's decision on this matter?
Minister Wong.
Thank you, President, and thank you to Senator Birmingham for the question. If I may also welcome members of the ADF here to Parliament. I trust that this will be interesting for you, and we thank you, as always, as one for your service to our country. I would make a few comments in response and in answer to Senator Birmingham's question. First point I would make is that obviously requests for additional capacity are made routinely by governments around the world, including Australia, and these requests aren't always granted. And in the case of Qatar Civil Aviation Authority's request, Minister King determined it was not in Australia's national interest to grant their request. I would make the point this is not the first time this has happened. The previous government made the same decision about Qatar, and Qatar's growth in Australia obviously has not happened as quickly as its authorities want, nor in such big leaps, and we recognise that some businesses and airlines would like to see Minister King make a different decision. But as those opposite might recall, governments don't have the luxury of focusing on vested interests. We have to focus on the national interest. And Australian government and the Australian government will support recovery and sustainable growth in the aviation sector. I would also make the point, because I'm asked about Premier Malinauskas. Premier Malinauskas was not reflecting on this decision. The Premier knows that Qatar can fly unlimited flights into Adelaide directly. Qatar can fly unlimited flights into Adelaide directly. And we know that the Premier has been working hard to increase. Well, was that a negative comment about Adelaide?
Thank
from
you.
one that said that we might have some bipartisanship on something.
Minister Wong, the time for answering has expired. I'm not calling Senator Birmingham until there's silence. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, President. On Sunday, when discussing the launch of new flights by Cathay Pacific and Singapore Airlines, the Transport Minister said, and I quote, "Increased capacity and new entrants to the Australian market will help lower prices." Does the government agree that increased capacity helps to lower prices? And if this applies to Cathay Pacific and Singapore, why does it not apply to Qatar Airways on its routes? What is the rationale for the national interest decision being made?
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Minister Wong.
It is important that Australians can access international travel and tourists can visit our shores. That's why we have air services agreement with more than 100 countries, and that's why capacity is going up. Capacity is going up. As you yourself said, Senator Birmingham, Cathay Pacific, China Southern, Singapore Airlines have announced more flights. And I again remind those opposite, and I'm surprised that Senator Birmingham doesn't get on the same ticket as I and start to argue for more flights by Qatar in and out of Adelaide. Qatar has no capacity constraints when flying to our secondary gateways. They could fly larger planes into our primary gateways also if they choose. Now, Senator Birmingham mentions Qantas. I agree with him.
Order.
I agree with him, and I agree with Peter Malinauskas. We would urge Qantas to reinstate international flights to and from Adelaide, something that the state government, the Labor state government, has been advocating. And I join with the state government in saying we'd like to see more Qantas flights in and out of Adelaide.
Has expired. Senator Birmingham, second supplementary.
Thanks, President. Minister, in the lead-up to the last election, the Prime Minister claimed that, quote, "When I make a mistake, I'll fess up to it, and I'll set about correcting that mistake. I won't blame someone else. I'll accept responsibility. That's what leaders do." In light of the intense criticism from the tourism industry, the endless inconsistencies in Minister King's public statements, the views of the Queensland Labor government, the statement of Federal Labor President Wayne Swan, why won't the Prime Minister take responsibility for his government's mistaken handling of the Qatar Airways application and set about correcting
Senator Birmingham, the time. Minister Wong.
Well, let's remember the record of those opposite. They gave billions of taxpayer dollars to Qantas for nothing in return. They stood by as Virgin collapsed into administration, watched while it was snatched up by foreign private equity. They oversaw mass outsourcing of jobs and a labour hire mess, driving down wages and conditions across the sector.
Order on my left. Senator McKenzie, I've just called the chamber to order. That includes you. Senator McKenzie. Minister, please continue.
They cut JobKeeper from Donata workers and their families in the lurch. And when in government, they made the same decision about Qatar. So these are the people who are now playing a lot of politics for certain vested interests that they are happy to argue for about this decision. Frankly, we're not going to take lectures from you when it comes to the aviation sector. We know the history of the coalition when it comes to aviation, and I again would say Qatar faces no restrictions in increasing its secondary gateway traffic.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Stewart.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. I was pleased to see last week in Adelaide the Prime Minister's announced that a referendum on the Voice to Parliament will be held on October 14. Can the Minister please explain to the Senate how the Voice is an opportunity to bring Australians together and help achieve progress for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Stewart for that question. I thank her for her work and her advocacy, and we were all very proud to be there with Senator Stewart, Senator McCarthy and so many leaders, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders. It was a very uplifting moment, and it was, as the Senator says, that when the Prime Minister announced it on the 14th of October, all Australians will have the opportunity to come together to vote for constitutional recognition through a voice. And, President, this is an issue that should be above politics, an opportunity to come together to bring about a better future for our country. And I want to acknowledge my predecessor, Julie Bishop, who joined me in Perth last week to talk with people about the Voice. And I'll quote what she said. For 20 years, I've seen us try all sorts of things telling Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples this will work, and it doesn't. So I think it makes sense to say to the people whose lives have been impacted, what are the problems and how do we fix them? Later in the week, I was joined in Adelaide by Natasha Stott-Despoja, Kate Carnell and Sean Gordon from the Liberals for Yes campaign and campaigning for the Yes vote. In Melbourne, Mr Shorten was joined by Mr Band, and in Sydney, Ms Pipasek was joined by Mr Turnbull, and they campaigned together. Because for some people this is above politics. And these community leaders all recognise this is an opportunity to bring Australians from all walks of life together. And Australians are coming together across the country in sporting clubs and community groups. One Australian I would particularly acknowledge is John Farnham AO, who for the first time has given the rights to You're the Voice, one of our unofficial anthems, to the Yes campaign. And the words of this song are about coming together, listening to each other and choosing a better future.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Stewart, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister, for that response.
Senator Stewart, please resume your seat. I'll wait for silence. Order. Senator Brown. Senator Stewart, order. Order. Senator Stewart, please continue.
I want to thank the minister for that response. Could the minister please outline how this year's referendum is a chance to make a practical difference to the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. The Voice will offer ideas and advice so governments can make better decisions to address the challenges facing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It will be an advisory committee made up of representatives from across the country, and it will not have power to make or veto government decisions. What it will do is improve outcomes in Indigenous health, housing, education and employment, because, as we all know, for too long governments with good intentions have spent billions trying to deal with these issues, but we have not achieved lasting improvement because we haven't listened sufficiently to the people on the ground. The current approach is broken, and the Voice is our best chance to fix this. The current approach is broken. The Voice is our best chance to fix this. The overwhelming majority of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people support the Voice. And as I said, the words of the song are about people coming together, listening to each other and choosing a better future. And that is exactly the choice Australians have on October 14.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. I'll wait for order before I call Senator Stewart. Senator Stewart, second supplementary.
Thank you. It's a shame that those opposite laugh at the idea of bringing people together. With the referendum question and date settled, following years and decades of advocacy by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, why is it important for Australians to take this opportunity to recognise our First Peoples in the Constitution?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister Wong.
Recognition through a voice is what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have asked for. We know that because so many Indigenous representatives met at Uluru and released the Uluru Statement from the Heart. But what is interesting is that
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Order on my left. Minister, please continue.
But what is interesting over the weekend, we saw Mr Dutton say he doesn't want referendum, he wants two. Not one, but two. According to Mr Dutton, it's a bad idea to ask all Australians to turn and vote in one referendum, but it's a good idea to ask them to turn up and vote in a second referendum. And he supports a voice, apparently, just not this voice. Well, so one referendum bad, two referendums good, according to the coalition and its leader. And a voice is okay, but not this voice. We know Mr Dutton is playing political games because when he had the chance to do something, he didn't, and now someone else is trying to do something, he tries to tear it down. He thinks he builds himself up by tearing others down.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator McKenzie.
Thank you very much, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. In just 7 weeks, the government ministers have given 7 different excuses for the Minister King's decision to stop Australians from accessing more seats and cheaper airfares. The excuses have variously been human rights, decarbonising aviation, protecting Qantas jobs, helping Qantas pay for its new fleet, the national interest, keeping Qantas profitable, and finally the Treasurer, who chimed in with, Qatar have unused access right now, that is the issue. Is the Treasurer's statement the authoritative answer as to why this government chose to keep airfares high and reduce competition in our aviation sector? And if not, what is the real reason for the decision?
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator McKenzie for the question. I don't agree with the proposition that how she's framed that question, so I don't accept that. But the government has been very clear that the decision on Qatar was made in the national interest, and it was made by the Transport Minister following the same process that Mr McCormack made when he made a decision to put on hold an application by Qatar Airways when he was minister. So it has been very clear in all of the responses provided by the government that this decision was made in the national interest. That is the decision that the Minister King made. She has been clear about that. And we would also say that for Qatar Airways, they are able to increase capacity if they wanted to right now. If they chose to put on more seats to Australia, they are able to do that now. They are able to fly into Adelaide, Avalon, Cairns, Canberra and the Gold Coast.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator McKenzie. Just a moment, Senator McKenzie. Order. Senator McKenzie.
Thank you. Just on relevance, in rejecting the premise of my question, was the Finance Minister suggesting that greater competition doesn't put downward pressure on airfares?
Senator McKenzie. Minister, please continue.
They can also fly larger planes into Sydney, Melbourne, Perth and Brisbane, but they are not currently doing so at the moment. Other airlines are also adding capacity. Cathay Pacific, Singapore Airlines and China Southern have all announced more flights. Now, airlines will continue to act in their commercial interests, but requests for additional capacity are determined by the Minister for Transport according to the national interest. Do you remember a concept like that, the national interest, acting in the national interest, as opposed to your political interest, which is your go-to method of operating?
Thank you. Senator McKenzie, first supplementary.
Last week, the Assistant Treasurer raised eyebrows when he said the Qatar Airways proposal to provide much-needed international seat capacity would, and I quote, make it unsustainable for the existing Australian-based carriers. Is the Assistant Treasurer's statement the authoritative answer? Can the minister confirm when the Assistant Treasurer said Australian-based carriers, what he really meant was Qantas?
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, I'll leave the Assistant Treasurer to respond to comments that he's made. But I would, and I think I think the selective quoting that goes on in this chamber should also be acknowledged. And read the entire transcript of his interview.
Senator Birmingham.
I will repeat.
Minister Gallagher, please resume your seat. Just a moment, Senator McKenzie. We wait for silence. Senator McKenzie.
Relevance. It was hard to get the Assistant Treasurer's transcripts, given it took 5 days for him to actually upload
Senator McKenzie, they are not points of order, and you know that very well. Minister Gallagher, please continue.
Thank you. But the decision made by the minister was made in the national interest. That is weighed, and as she has said, there are a number of considerations that go into making that final decision, Qatar could add increased capacity on their flights now. They could fly bigger planes. They could fly into a number of different airports. They choose not to do so at this stage.
Senator McKenzie, second supplementary.
Does the Treasury analysis demonstrate that more flights and more competition is good for consumers, exporters, the tourism industry and our economy? If so, isn't limiting flights and competition bad for consumers, exporters, the tourism industry and our economy?
Thank you, Senator McKenzie. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much. Well, the Albanese government supports competition, but global aviation is not a free-for-all. There are country-to-country agreements in place, as there were under your government, as there were and as there should have been under your government. Those country-to-country agreements continue. For example, Australian carriers would like to have greater access to European markets. They currently don't. Singapore would like greater increase to American markets. They don't. It's not a free-for-all. There are country-to-country agreements in place, and it is entirely appropriate that the minister, when considering this, makes her decision in the national interest, which is what she has done.
Order. Minister, please continue. Or you finished? Thank you. Senator Faruqi.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Senator Watt. Minister, heartbreaking footage on ABC 730 shows exported sheep collapsed in exhaustion and cowering in pain and fear. The brutality of this trade extends well beyond the suffering of sheep on ships of misery. This was really hard to watch. Australian regulators are failing sheep welfare again and again, and it is clear that they haven't ensured compliance in the supply chain. Yet, animal welfare advocates are doing the job of the department to expose animal cruelty again. I understand the department had received extensive complaints about these incidents, and you have now said that there is an investigation into this particular expose. Minister, have you seen the full 7:30 footage, and will you make the results of this investigation public?
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President, and thanks, Senator Faruqi. I, like many Australians, I think, watched that footage with a degree of concern. It was extremely concerning footage that was aired on the 7:30 report about a week or so ago. In fact, the first time I personally was shown that footage was while I was doing an interview with the 7:30 report. They showed that footage to me because this is being investigated appropriately by the Department of Agriculture, which conducts an independent investigation that I don't interfere in. So I did not seek to see the footage. I was not provided with the footage by the department. That would have been highly inappropriate to do so, given that they're conducting that investigation in an independent way. But I obviously did see the footage, both when it was shown to me by the 7:30 report during my interview and also when the program aired. As I say, the department that I'm the Minister of did receive allegations of non-compliance with the Exporter Supply Chain Assurance System, known as ESCAS, for sheep in Oman in late May. And the department is now taking those allegations very seriously and actually did take immediate regulatory action while proceeding with its investigation. So, for instance, additional surveillance and additional reporting requirements were imposed on the exporters as an immediate step while that investigation was going underway. I think, Senator Faruqi, you asked whether that investigation, once it's complete, whether the outcomes would be revealed publicly. I can assure you that that investigation will be dealt with in the way that they are always dealt with. This is the first time there's been one since I've been the Minister, so I'm not sure what the history has been, but if the history has been that those investigations are released, then they will be made public. As I say, I was concerned about that footage. It's important that Australia has a strong animal welfare record both at home and abroad, and that's why we're having that matter investigated at the moment.
Thank you, Minister Watt. Senator Faruqi, first supplementary.
Minister, an RSPCA survey shows that 71% of Western Australians, where the majority of Australian sheep are exported from, support a phase-out. Independent polling commissioned by my office shows 85% of Australians support a phase-out of live sheep exports. An overwhelming 82% of submissions to the independent panel advising on the phase-out are supportive of it. Minister, can you confirm that Labor intends to keep its promise to phase out live sheep exports?
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President. Thanks, Senator Faruqi. Yes, I can confirm, and every time I go to Western Australia I'm asked this question as well, as I was last week when I was over there again. Our government does intend to keep its promises, including this one, that we will phase out the live sheep export trade. You have cited some of those statistics. I know that the RSPCA's survey did indicate that over 70% of Western Australians support the government's policy. In fact, today I understand the RSPCA has tabled a petition with about 40,000 Australians calling for this trade to be phased out. And I know that in years gone by there have been actually members of the opposition who have supported the phase-out of live sheep. People like Ms Ley, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, and Senator Henderson is on the record in the past having supported the phase-out of live sheep. I can only assume that Senator Henderson retains that position, given that she was on the record saying that it should be phased out, and we have every intention of carrying out our policy.
Senator Faruqi, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. In fact, a member of your own party is tabling that petition signed by more than 43,000 people, calling on the government in this term of Parliament to legislate the date to end live sheep exports within the shortest possible time frame. And again, independent polling shows that 59% of people want the phase-out within 2 years. Minister, will you, in this term of Parliament, legislate the date to end live sheep exports within the shortest possible time frame?
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. Minister Watt.
Thanks, Senator Faruqi. Well, I'm on the record many times saying that The government is committed to implementing our election policy to phase out the live sheep export trade by sea, but we also intend to do it in an orderly manner, because we understand that this would be a big adjustment, particularly for sheep producers in Western Australia, but also for many others in the supply chain. And we're not going to do this in a rushed manner that doesn't take consideration of the needs of the people who are involved in that trade. But we are committed to implementing the policy. As you're probably aware, I've appointed a panel to consult on this matter, and I'm expecting their recommendations soon. Their recommendations will include something around the timeframe over which this policy should be implemented, but I've made clear that we won't be phasing out the trade in this term of office, because we do think it needs to be done in an orderly manner. But as I say, I'm waiting for the recommendations of that panel as to the timeframe by which we would phase out that trade.
Thank you, Minister Watt. Senator Marielle Smith.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Cost of living is continuing to hit many Australians hard, despite moderating inflation. People are often raising the pressure on their household budgets with me as I'm out and about in South Australia. The Albanese Labor government hasn't wasted a day in implementing promises it made at the election, many of which were designed to reduce pressure on Australians in a higher-than-normal cost of living environment. Can the minister explain how the Albanese Labor government's policies have been providing targeted cost of living relief, particularly in respect to the cost of medicines?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Smith for the question and for the work she's doing representing the good people of South Australia. We have been rolling out a carefully calibrated range of measures to fight inflation, but also to assist Australians with the cost of living over the past 16 months. The government's cost of living package provides assistance with rent, with energy bills, with more affordable childcare and with fee-free TAFE. But in addition to all of these important investments, there's another area where we are already seeing very tangible results by reducing the cost of living pressures for Australian households, and that is in relation to cheaper medicines. President, in the first 6 months of the Labor government's cheaper medicines policy, we have seen Australians collectively save $138 million from 12 million cheaper scripts. That's $138 million that is going back into people's pockets. Before the election, we promised to reduce the maximum co-payment under the PBS from $42.50 to a maximum of $30, a reduction of 29%. And those cost savings are now a reality for Australians who are purchasing their medicine. And the proof is in the numbers. In the ACT, $3.5 million saved. In New South Wales, $43 million. In Northern Territory, $185,000 saved. Queensland, $27 million saved. South Australia, $9 million saved across 805,000 cheaper scripts in your state, Senator Smith. In Tasmania, $3 million saved on 260,000 cheaper scripts. In Victoria, $36 million saved on 3.2 million cheaper scripts. And in WA, $16 million saved on 1.4 million cheaper scripts. We took this to the election. We said we would make medicines cheaper and that it will make a material difference, and it is.
Just a moment, Senator Smith. Order on my left. I should not have to call order 2 or 3 times. Senator Smith, first supplementary.
Last Friday, the government's changes to 60-day dispensing at pharmacies came into effect, meaning that Australians with a broad range of conditions that will require regular medications will pay less for their scripts. It's reassuring to hear that the cheaper medicines changes implemented in January—
Please resume your seat. Order on my left. Senator Hughes and Senator Ruston. Senator Smith, please continue.
Do I start again?
I think that, yes, the minister is asking yes.
Great. Last Friday, the government's changes to 60-day dispensing at pharmacies came into effect, meaning that Australians with a broad range of conditions that require regular medications will pay less for their scripts. It's reassuring to hear that the cheaper medicines changes implemented in January have already saved Australians millions of dollars. How will the changes to dispensing rules save millions of Australians even more on their medicines at a time when cost of living is continuing to add pressure to household budgets?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much. I thank Senator Smith for the question. Building on the significant savings already being experienced by Australians from the cheaper medicines that I just spoke about, last Friday saw the beginning of the 60-day dispensing changes. These are important changes. They will mean even more savings for 4 million patients who are on about 100 common medicines for ongoing health conditions like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, osteoporosis and a range of other conditions. These individuals will now be able to get a 60-day script with the agreement of their doctor, and only in that circumstance, which means 2 scripts for the price of 1, halving the cost of their medicine, relieving pressure on the health system and far fewer visits to the doctors and to the pharmacy. And we are looking forward to working with the pharmacy through the next pharmacy agreement, which we're currently negotiating, and I think it's good to have government and pharmacy back at the table working together.
Thank you. Senator Smith, second supplementary.
Minister, Australians who are still paying higher than normal prices for everyday costs like petrol, groceries and energy bills want to see a continued effort from government to reduce their cost of living.
Senator Smith, please resume your seat. Senator Smith, please continue.
Getting my steps up, it's good. Minister, Australians who are still paying higher than normal prices for everyday costs like petrol, groceries and energy bills want to see a continued effort from the government to reduce their costs of living. What else is the government doing which will deliver tangible results when it comes to reducing pressure on the hip pockets of Australians? And can the minister explain how Australians are better off under an Albanese Labor government, which is delivering policies that will reduce the cost of living instead of the constant wrecking we've seen from this lot?
Order. Senator Ruston. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. I thank Senator Smith for the question. Now, we know when those opposite were in government and they threw money around, it wasn't targeted and there was no care taken to prepare this country for the future. We inherited a mess and we're fixing it up bit by bit. And we haven't taken our eye off addressing the pressure on inflation, but continuing to provide cost of living relief where we can without adding to the challenge of inflation. So we've advocated for wage increases and we're seeing pleasing results there for the first time in a decade after those opposite opposed them at every point. We're delivering cheaper childcare, we're delivering cheaper medicines and we are delivering fee-free TAFE and more university places so that more Australians can get access to more training and better jobs. This is what Australians need from their government. The 180,000 fee-free TAFE places have reached their limit earlier than expected. 60% of those places are going to women, and it's a fantastic result to see so many more people in training.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Communications, Senator Watt. Minister, why is the ABC receiving funds from potential agents of foreign influence for its fact-checking partnership with RMIT?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. I'm not actually aware of the suggestions that Senator Roberts is making, and I'm a little wary about taking it at face value because I know Senator Roberts has a certain view of the ABC. It's not a view that I share. And Senator Roberts, I'm not sure, has always accurately represented the situation when it comes to the ABC. But I would invite Senator Roberts to present further evidence of that if he has that evidence available. What I will say, though, is that this government is a very strong supporter of the ABC. Of course, we recognise that it has a very important role as the national broadcaster. It has an important role not just in our big capital cities, but particularly in regional parts of Australia, which is often the only way of having local, regional stories told at the national level. And that's why we're supportive of the ABC. It also, of course, plays a very important role during natural disasters as a source of critical information for people seeking to stay alive during emergencies. So they are some of the reasons that we support the ABC, and they are some of the reasons why we were so concerned by the budget cuts that were imposed by the then coalition government on the ABC. because that removed the ability or reduced the ability of the ABC to broadcast those regional stories in some of those areas that Senator Roberts and Senator Hanson like to say they care about. That reduced the ABC's ability to provide some of that emergency information that is so vital to rural and regional communities. So we're very proud of the fact that we're strong supporters of the ABC. We don't join in the regular attacks that we see on the ABC from the Conservative side of politics, because we think that they play and the institution plays a very important role in our national democracy. And we will always remain strong supporters of the ABC.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts, first supplementary.
International fact-checking networks' financial statements show that foreign organisation gave the RMIT-ABC fact-check partnership multiple grants. The International Fact-Checking Network receives funds from the US government, a private Norwegian foundation, foreign-headquartered tech giant Meta, and a handful of private shady foundations. Why didn't the ABC declare that it was receiving funding from private, foreign organisations and governments for its RMIT fact-checking partnership?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Watt.
Yes, well, that's a fair point, Senator Brown. I think if there was a fact-checker for some of the things that come out of One Nation, they'd be very, very busy. And we know, Senator Roberts, and as for Senator Canavan, you wouldn't even start trying to check facts from Senator Canavan. You'd want to have more than a year, more than a decade, if you wanted to check facts from Senator Canavan. As I say, I'm very wary of entering into propositions that are being put by Senator Roberts when it comes to foreign interference and foreign influence. He is prone to saying various things about those issues which don't always bear fact-checking themselves. Again, Senator Roberts, I'd invite you to provide any hard evidence that you have to support the claims that you're making. But I could repeat my position that we are strong supporters of the ABC. In fact, I think the public regard it as the most trustworthy news agency in the country. That is regularly shown in surveys.
Thank you, Minister Watt. The time for answering has expired. Senator Roberts, second supplementary.
Thank you. The government's Combating Misinformation and Disinformation Bill does not define those terms in specifics. It would likely be left to biased and foreign influence fact-checkers. Facebook has suspended RMIT Fact Lab services after accusations of bias in fact-checking the Voice referendum and reports of lapsed accreditation. Minister, will the government abandon its Orwellian misinformation and disinformation bill, given that the fact-checkers' credibility has been destroyed?
Minister Watt.
Senator Roberts, thank you for the question. I know that you and a number of members of the Liberal and National Party have a strong position, so you say, in relation to matters of misinformation.
Minister Watt, I'll remind you to direct your comments to the chair.
Okay. President, I know that there are many senators from the Liberal, National and One Nation parties who say all sorts of things about misinformation. It doesn't seem to prevent them from presenting all sorts of misinformation about certain referendums that we're about to have in this country. It doesn't seem to prevent them joining in on misinformation and disinformation campaigns, telling people that we're going to be facing parking tickets being legislated by The Voice and all sorts of nonsense like that. So if you want to have a discussion about misinformation, I suggest that you keep your own house in order and come to this parliament in good faith rather than the constant misinformation we see from the other side.
Order. Senator Ayres and Senator Mackenzie. Senator Cash.
Thank you. And my question is to the Minister for Trade and Tourism, Senator Farrell. Will airfares to and from Australia be higher or lower as a result of the government's decision to block Qatar Airways' application for 28 additional flights in and out of Australia?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Cash for her question. And I guess it's interesting to note it's taken three of the opposition's questions to get to the issue of tourism as it relates to the issues that the opposition have been raising today. Well, look, I I'll take that interjection, Senator Ruston. And no, I won't be filibustering. I'll be answering the question that I.
Oh, sorry, Minister Farrell. Senator Cash.
Thank you. And it is a point of order in relation to relevance. It is now well over 30 seconds into the answer. It was a very specific question in relation to airfares for Australians and whether or not they would be higher or lower as a result of the government's decision.
Thank you, Senator Cash. I will remind the minister of his question, but I'll also remind all senators in this place the minister is entitled to take interjections. So there was an interjection which the minister also responded to, but I have reminded him of the question. I would ask all senators to listen in silence. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. Look, the reality is this, Madam President. There is significant downward pressure on airfares at the moment, and one of the reasons for that is that we as a government are correcting all of the problems that you created during the pandemic in terms of the ability of Australians to travel in and out of this country. Now, can I go through?
Order on my left. Senator Cash. Senator Birmingham. Order. Minister Farrell, please continue.
President, they want to ask the questions, but they don't want to hear what the answers are. And let me go through some of the most recent.
Minister Farrell. Senator McKenzie, I've called you by name a number of times during question time. Tomorrow night, Tuesday night, is open-ended adjournment. I invite you to make your comments there and not during question time. Minister Farrell.
I'm on duty tomorrow night, President. So let me go through some of the airlines that are now coming into Australia as a result of decision.
Minister Farrell. Senator Birmingham.
President, a point of order on direct relevance. This was a one-sentence question asked by Senator Cash. It went very precisely to a decision taken by the government in relation to Qatar Airways, and as enlightening as it may be for the senator to go through a bunch of other decisions that may or may not have been taken, to be directly relevant to the question asked, he should address the decision that he is being asked about, not other decisions.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Minister Wong.
On the point of order, the question was about price. And last time I looked, supply and demand are relevant to price. And the Deputy Leader and Trade Minister is going through the ways in which the government's policies are increasing the supply of flights in and out of Australia. It's entirely relevant. I know that economics is no longer relevant to you now you're in opposition.
Wong.
I know you don't want to let economics get in the way of politics.
Minister Wong, on the points of order, I will remind the minister of the question, but he was talking about cheaper airfares, which was part of the question that Senator Cash asked. And I would once again ask senators to stop the disorderly interjections. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. And look, the opposition doesn't like us talking about all of the things that this government is doing in the tourism space to put downward pressure on prices. Let's go through some of them. China Southern will start Guangzhou.
Thank you, Minister Farrell. Senator Cash, first supplementary.
Thank you. And Minister, did you advocate to the Minister for Transport or the Prime Minister for
Senator Cash, please resume your seat. Interjections across the chamber are disorderly. I'm going to ask Senator Cash to start her question again and for people to listen in silence. Senator Cash.
Thank you, Minister. Did you advocate to the Minister for Transport or the Prime Minister for approval of Qatar Airways' application for additional flights in and out of Australia?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Cash, for her first supplementary question. I don't need to have to advocate propositions to either the Minister for Transport or the Prime Minister to put downward pressure on prices as they relate to airfares. Can I go through? Can I go through? I only got a chance.
Order. Minister Farrell, please continue.
I only got a chance to go through one of the companies which are now flying into Australia. But OK, I will tell you some more. China Southern restarted the Shenzhen Sydney route with 3 flights per week from the 17th of June 2023. Singapore Airlines has revealed that it will add 4,700 seats between Singapore and Australia from March 2024, including increased capacity to Adelaide, Cairns, Darwin, Perth, Sydney and Melbourne. Changes include upgauging to wide bodies.
Thank you, Minister Farrell. The time for answering has expired. Senator Cash, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Prior to the decision being made, did you discuss the application from Qatar Airways for additional flights in and out of Australia with any executive or representative of Qantas? If so, when?
Thank you. Senator Cash, Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. Well, I don't make a habit of discussing, particularly in this chamber, discussions I may or may not have with no one. Well, you can't draw that conclusion either. I respect. I mean, I think one of the reasons why this mob here lost government is that they didn't respect discussions between their ministers and business people in this country. But I don't make a habit. I don't make a habit of coming into question time and revealing private discussions that I may or may not have with particular individuals, because that is not the way to build up trust between a government and businesses. And let me tell you, this government is all about building up trust, rebuilding the trust that.
Thank you, Minister Farrell. Time for answering has expired. Senator Rice.
Thanks, President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs about Tibet. Minister, decisions regarding the selection, education and veneration of Tibetan Buddhist religious leaders are exclusively spiritual matters that should be made by the appropriate religious authorities within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition and in the context of the will of practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism. So, Foreign Minister, in your conversations with representatives of the Chinese government, what are you doing to ensure that these practices are protected in Tibet and to ensure that the Chinese government does not have a role in the selection of the next Dalai Lama?
Thank you, Senator Rice. Minister Wong.
Thank you to Senator Rice for her question, and I also acknowledge that she is one of the co-chairs of the Parliamentary Friends Group, as is my colleague Susan Templeman, Ms Templeman, and I think Senator Smith, and to thank you for your work in that context. As I said to representatives of the Tibetan community with whom I met today, and I've met with a number of them previously, there is. It's a very important part of engagement to have parliamentary groups who are obviously able to engage as parliamentarians with members of the community and to, as parliamentarians, make statements. And I understand that statements were made, although I wasn't obviously present at your media conference. It is the case that we are concerned about the erosion of rights and freedoms in Tibet. And we, in our engagement with our counterparts at a number of levels, continue to raise concerns with the representatives of the Chinese government about the erosion of rights and freedoms in Tibet. We are gravely concerned by disturbing reports of the separation of Tibetan children from their families, about the detention of Tibetans for peaceful expression of political views and the suppression of Tibetan religious expression, as well as what are described as excessive security measures. We have raised our concerns with counterparts, and I would say for the first time an Australian government This is the first time Australian government has done this. Australia raised our concerns in our national statement at the Human Rights Council in March, and I again say that is the first time an Australian government has done that, and in part I would credit not just the parliamentary friends but also members of the community for their advocacy.
Senator Rice, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Thank you, Foreign Minister. I'd like to know whether you have received anything of any substance from the Chinese government regarding the repression of human rights, freedom in Tibet and the Sinicisation of Tibetan culture. And I'd also draw your attention back to the key issue in my first question, which was about the Dalai Lama and what, if anything, you have received from the Chinese government in terms of their involvement in the selection of the next Dalai Lama.
Thank you, Senator Rice. Minister Wong.
As Senator Rice would be aware, I've spoken in this chamber and publicly about the importance of dialogue and engagement with China, but I've also spoken about the challenges of navigating that relationship. We are obviously there are differences which have to be managed, and those differences include a difference of views about political systems. But what I would say, so that the term of the question appears to suggest that these are matters we can obtain an outcome within China about. What we can do is to advocate, and we are seeking to do that both bilaterally and through multilateral processes. And I think that advocacy matters in the international community. But obviously, I appreciate that others
the time for answering has expired. Senator Rice, second supplementary.
Thanks, President. Minister, 6 UN Special Rapporteurs have written to the Chinese government about forced labour in Tibet, raising concerns about the extensive labour transfer program in the Tibetan Autonomous Region, placing rural workers into low-skilled and low-paid industrial jobs, and allegedly eroding Tibetan minority languages, cultural practices and religion. Will the government implement a ban on the import of goods produced by forced labour, as agreed to in the ALP National Conference platform, given that the Labor had voted in support of this ban whilst in opposition?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister Wong. I beg your pardon, Senator Rice.
Thank you, Senator Rice. So, prior to the election, we announced a strengthening of the modern slavery framework. And I was part of the discussion about that after engaging with civil society advocates, including Walk Free. And the approach we are taking is to work to strengthen our domestic framework so that we can ensure, as far as we are able, that Australian consumers can have confidence in the supply chains of products that they buy, goods and services that they purchase, from whichever jurisdiction. I don't think there's anyone in Australia who would advocate or believe that it is acceptable for us to, or for companies to profit from forced labour. So the approach we are taking is the Modern Slavery Act. The Attorney General is leading that. A review has been conducted, and government will formulate its response in relation to that review.
Senator O'Neill.
President, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Skills and Training, Senator Watt. This week we celebrate National TAFE Day, a time to highlight the achievements of our public TAFE system and help raise the perceptions of TAFE in our vocational education and training sector. I noted at the beginning of last year OECD data identified Australia as having the second highest labour shortage amongst OECD countries. There's never been a more important time to invest in and value our vocational education and training sector. How is the Albanese Labor government helping to put TAFE at the heart of Australia's vet sector?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator O'Neill, who I know has a very long-standing commitment to the public TAFE institutions in her state of New South Wales. Studying at TAFE has provided a pathway to a rewarding career for millions of Australians. There are so many career paths to choose from, and not only does it deliver great jobs, but TAFE also helps to meet demand for skilled workers right across Australia. Upon entering government, we were immediately struck by the skill shortage that we inherited. And is it any wonder, given the billions of dollars of cuts made to TAFE under the leadership of people like Senator Cash over those 10 years, cut, no wonder we had that skill shortage. OECD data identified Australia as having the second highest labour shortage amongst OECD countries. The second highest labour shortage amongst OECD countries. That is the legacy of a decade of coalition government and cuts to TAFE. The skills priority list, which shows what occupations are in shortage, nearly doubled. It jumped from 153 to 286 in a year. What a mess. Just another mess from the coalition government. And so that's why we took immediate action by bringing together Australians, unions, employers and civil society at the Jobs and Skills Summit and by working with state and territory governments to fund 180,000 fee-free TAFE places in 2023. And I'm very pleased to advise the chamber that we have already smashed that target. But that's not all we're doing to support TAFE. The Albanese government is committed to ensuring at least 70% of Commonwealth vet funding goes to public TAFE. We support TAFE. We don't cut it like we saw under the coalition. We're also delivering $50 million through the TAFE Technology Fund to improve IT facilities, workshops, laboratories and telehealth simulators across the country. We're working together to achieve better outcomes for students and deliver more access and equity to the vet sector. We're backing TAFE.
Senator O'Neill, first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that important response. At the Jobs and Skills Summit last year, which you've just mentioned, the Albanese government committed to accelerate the delivery of fee-free TAFE places, with 180,000 places to be delivered this year. How is the Albanese Labor government increasing access to TAFE places, and how are enrolments tracking in fee-free TAFE?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Watt.
I'm very glad you asked, Senator O'Neill, because the Albanese government's plan to train, retrain or upskill Australians and tackle skill shortages is a monumental success, with more than 180,000 fee-free TAFE places enrolments in the first 6 months. The Prime Minister and Minister for Skills and Training visited Bentley TAFE in Perth just last week to announce that in the first 6 months about 215,000 Australians have enrolled for a fee-free course. So our target was 180,000. We've smashed it by achieving 215,000, and that's 6 months earlier than anticipated, nearly 35,000 places more than expected. That's 215,000 people who are accessing high-quality training. I know Senator Henderson's not happy to hear this good news about fee-free TAFE places and the number of Australians who are taking up for them because she and her colleagues wanted to cut TAFE when they had the opportunity. More than 51,000 students have enrolled in courses across healthcare, aged care and disability care, many more in early childhood education and many more in digital courses.
The time for answering has expired. Senator O'Neill, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister Watt. The opportunities afforded by fee-free study can change lives and the economy for the better. We know that 9 out of 10 future jobs will require post-school qualifications and 4 of those will require vocational level training. Minister, what's been the response to our policies to rebuild TAFE and put TAFE at the centre of our vet sector?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Watt.
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Well, as you would expect, anyone who actually cares about dealing with the skills shortage in this country, anyone who cares about backing TAFE, has been very positive about these policies. But unfortunately, there are some people who don't share those views. After 10 years of neglect, it's quite frankly a relief and essential for the future of this nation that a party that believes in the value of education and training is back in charge. Those opposite never respected TAFE and the vet sector under their watch. You asked what the response has been to our policies. Well, if left to those opposite, they would deprive thousands of students and workers of our fee-free opportunity and cost of living relief. In fact, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition has called fee-free TAFE wasteful spending. That's what the opposition thinks about fee-free TAFE and giving more skills to Australians. Wasteful spending. And the last time the Leader of the Opposition said the word TAFE in Parliament, guess what decade it was? Wasn't this decade, wasn't the last decade, it was in 2004, over 19 years ago. They don't care about TAFE and they don't care about skills.
Thank you, Minister Watt. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Minister, how are the media, the public or the Parliament meant to hold ministers to account for travel via special purpose aircraft when no details of routes undertaken or passengers on flights are provided?
Thank you, Senator Hume. Minister Wong.
Thank you for the question. I understand this question has been asked in the House, and I would make this point that the last time a SPA manifest was tabled under your government was August of 2021. August of 2021 was the last time you tabled a manifest. Well, that's the truth. Well, isn't it interesting? Oh, come on, Senator Wong, for telling the truth. For telling the truth. Now, I'm advised that SPA guidelines were that the AP advised that new SPA guidelines were required in November of 2022.
Senator Henderson.
I know that the senator wishes to run a Corangamite campaign from the Senate, but I'm not sure that's going to work.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Wong, I am calling the chamber to order. Senator Henderson. Senator Henderson, I invite you also to make your contributions on Tuesday night, not during question time. I've called you many times today. Minister, please continue.
I'm sorry, Senator Henderson. I assumed that you might stand for Corangamite, not Corio, but fair enough. But I'm sure you might want to do that as well. But November 2022, the AFP advised new SPA guidelines were required. Senator
Henderson. Senator Henderson, order. Minister Wong, please continue.
Thank you. As I was saying, new SPA guidelines we were advised that new SPA guidelines were required, and the government published new SPA reports, special purpose aircraft reports, to present in a manner consistent with revised security guidelines. In other words, security agencies gave clear advice. We have followed that advice. And unlike those opposite, we are being transparent and published what we can and not publish what we cannot. Well,
order.
I've answered the question.
Senator Hume, first supplementary.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. So what is the security risk that's created by revealing the routes flown, potentially without dates, of special purpose aircraft flights? And what is the security risk created by revealing the passengers on board those flights?
Thank you, Senator Hume. Minister.
It is surprising that the responsible opposition would ask about security risks in that context. What I can say is that the guidelines were revised as a consequence of AFP advice, and the government is publishing information in accordance with those guidelines.
Senator Hume, second supplementary. Senator Hume, please resume your seat. Senator O'Neill, I extend the same invitation to you to also join Tuesday night's adjournment list. Senator Hume, second supplementary.
Will the minister confirm that there were no comparable commercial flights available on every occasion that the Minister for Defence has used a special purpose aircraft for domestic travel purposes?
Minister Wong.
The Minister for Defence has made clear publicly and to the Parliament that every thing he has done, every flight he has taken, has been in pursuit of his duties as the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defence on behalf of the country. And with that, I ask that further questions be placed on notice.